I saw something pretty interesting yesterday about Shedeur Sanders. He attended the 13U Midwest Youth Elite Football Conference 7-on-7 championship between Glenville Elite, again Elite, and the Wolfpack. This was Lincoln West High School. And it got me to thinking about, athletes being role models and inspirations. And I want to have a conversation with you all real quick about how do you all feel and view athletes as role models? What's your opinions of that? And if you're a parent watching this episode and you have kids and your kid is a diehard sports fan and he or she might be looking up to an athlete as a role model, how do you approach that as a parent? I remember growing up as a kid, like that's something that my father was just not on, right? Like he was not going to allow me to allow a stranger to have that much influence on my decision making, on my behavioral, or on my behavior, just things of that nature. He would tell me all the time, like, I'm your role model. The people that's helped raising you, that's your role model. Don't expect to gain too much from an athlete that you watch from afar because you don't know these men and women. You don't know what they do when these cameras turn off and things like that. And that's something that I always carry with me. And if you heard me speak prior, if you heard me speak on other platforms and other episodes, I'm quick to tell people, man, I ain't grow up trying to be like Mike. I ain't grow up wanting to be like, Ken Griffey Jr. and things like that. Like I grew up trying to be like my dad. My dad was my hero. My dad was my role model. And I feel like it's a fine line between athletes being role models and inspirations. Now, the flip side of that coin is, for some of these young men and women, they might not have anybody positive to look up to. And so, how you carry yourself as an athlete and how present you are, it might make the difference in, that person being motivated or depressed. And I posted about Shedeur, being at Lincoln West, and I saw the 13-year-olds from the Gien Elite Muni League team. They was overly excited, and one of the moms tweeted at me, and she said, this is something my son has not stopped talking about since he met Shedeur, and she found it that he woke up the next morning doing push-ups. You know what I mean? Or he's been taking his workouts extra serious since then. And this is not the first time that Shedeur has showed himself in the community, at the schools, dealing with the youth since he's been here in Cleveland. And me personally, I just think it's very, very important to do so because, as somebody that comes from the inner city and understands all that entails, you see a lot of violence, you see a lot of sold, a lot of drugs being used. And sometimes you don't have anything positive to look forward to. Some people, the truth is, they only know that 2 or 3 mile radius in the community that they grew up in. They don't know anything else. And so for somebody like Shedeur, who really don't come from that background, right? Shedeur comes from a home that had two parents, two parents that worked hard. He grew up in the suburbs. His family had some money. And so he didn't have to go through some of those economical challenges that life might offer some people. And yet he still makes it his business to show face and to be present because he understands how being an inspiration to these young men and women, how it can have a huge impact down the road. And it was just something that had me thinking, do you believe that more in athletes should embrace the role of being somebody that's a role model or somebody that's, that creates inspiration? I like to consider myself that create somebody that creates inspiration, just knowing where I come from, knowing my backstory, knowing how much I've overcame, and knowing that there are young kids that grew up in the same neighborhood as me or similar neighborhoods who might be interested in taking this step, right? And because they've never seen many black faces on TV or heard many black voices on the radio, that they might be discouraged that they can do so. And then you look up and you see somebody like me who's not a former athlete, who for a very long time worked a regular job, put myself in position to do this job. I like to go back to those communities and I like to speak to the youth and I like to like be present to let them know, like, if I can do it, if I can overcome some of the things I've overcome, you can do the same thing. And so I think it's important for all of us, not just the athletes, but especially us locally here in Cleveland that might be doing something that has a significant impact or can like create change. I think it's important for us to be present and not just, post about it from a distance.